Okay, as this goes on, watch the chick on the left. She's twitching and fidgeting an awful lot. There could be any various reasons why she's doing that. Is she really uncomfortable with what is going on, the direction the country is going? In case you didn't see it, Prime Minister Trudeau invokes the Emergencies Act, successor to the War Measure Act, to quell protests in Canada. The peaceful protests that the tiny fraction of the country is taking part. It's weird that you would need something like that last was enacted in I think 1918, Dub 1, 1939, then 1970. I don't know what happened in 1970, some kind of civil unrest, and now current year 2022. So you've got two world wars where the last time it was enacted. And now you have a bouncy castle with a bunch of truckers, and it's not even that many truckers who are taking part in the peaceful protests. But you need to seize power to deal with like a tiny handful of truckers who are protesting. This seems a bit odd, unless it's just an excuse to seize power. And there's glow ops. Like whenever there's an opportunity to do some glowing from orbit ops, you can trust your Soros, Rothschild, and Schwab-controlled government to take that opportunity. It's funny, people go something like, free speech, liberty, is becoming a far-right extremist plank of the platform. It's a talking point. It's a far-right extremist, alt-right, fringe Nazi value. Free speech. It's weird that you would give your opponents that win. But there's media now, they're trying to reframe the narrative to say how free speech became a far right issue, instead of saying we're on the left, but free speech is also a left-wing issue, right? That's how you take back the narrative, assuming that you believed free speech was a value that's first and foremost. Now, plot twist, if you're on the left, it's not a value that's first and foremost. It is a right-wing talking point. The right wing owns free expression. We're not trying to deplatform people. The left is doing that. Because, as I always say, they have bad ideas that can't be defended in the open marketplace. The new town square, the new digital town square, if the commies have good ideas, I would invite them to have a live stream with a Nazi, and they can discuss and debate varying points, and let's let the good ideas come to the surface. There's probably good things about both of those parties, the ideologies that you can take from, and maybe take one side or the other, or just take the best of and create something else. But we're on the side where the truth doesn't fear investigation. It's funny. I'm reading this book called On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder. It's a graphic novel, and it's really stupid. 80-90% of it is stupid because it's written by a globalist who's got a very, he's got Trump-Angel syndrome, and he's very, very biased. But some of it is accurate. And the thing is, he's talking about the events of World War II, and he's discussing all these. And to be fair, he's also talking about Castro and Mao Zedong and Stalin and all this other kind of stuff. So it's biased against. He's a globalist. He can't help himself. But he's trying to cover things a little bit. And the thing is, he's recommending all these books to read. And you're talking about the events of World War II, and I'm reading this guy's book and thinking, why didn't you recommend Mein Kampf? That would be like the number one book to recommend. Why wouldn't that be first and foremost, to at least know what some of the reasons were behind these ideas? Stalin didn't write a book, but you could recommend the Communist Manifesto if you wanted to read some of Moses Mordecai Levy's book, Mein Kampf, and whatever Engels and Lenin were writing about. They all have writings. It's weird that he didn't recommend that. And here's, like I say, our side says, yeah, go ahead, read anything you want. Read their side of the argument, read our side of the argument. If they have an argument that says they absolutely are able to destroy our side of the argument, go ahead and read that one first if you'd like. And then when you're done reading it, read the argument that it purportedly set out to destroy. And you decide for yourself. That's our side of the equation, saying read all the books you need to read. We can read them together. We can have a books on tape or something. Their side of the equation gets very nervous when you start talking about reading all these books. And it's weird because, like I always say, the truth doesn't fear investigation, right? The left has taken off the mask. They've taken off the mask over the past 20 years. I just haven't been paying attention to it as much 20 years ago. So if you haven't been paying attention, it feels like it's kind of recently. No, it's just a series of slowly boiling the frog. It happens. And it happens slowly, incrementally. It's incremental globalism, communism. That's another thing, is hearing people on Twitter, which I'm on for about another 2 weeks before they kick me off, hearing people call fascism communism. Communism, globalism, Bolshevism, Marxism, Leninism, Stalinism, those are all slight variations. And to be fair, globalism is not exactly communism. It's actually worse. But they're in the same ballpark. But they're calling anything Trudeau does is fascism. Anything Trump does is fascism. Anything the far right does is, of course, fascism. But they're also calling, like Klaus Schwab, Soros, and Rothschilds, the machinations that they foment, they're calling that fascism too. It's like, no, those words have meanings. If you're really going to go down this path, you got to at least start using words correctly. This is probably too base for YouTube. I don't know. Anyway, so the next thing is they're talking about, so free speech is a far right value. Great, we'll take that. And they also something like those people in World War II, the good guys, depending on your point of view, or the bad guys, depending on your point of view, they were also against forced medical procedures. And some of the you're not Nazis, are you? Because they didn't want vaxxers either. Yeah, weird. We're just asking to get kicked off YouTube, I guess. Oh, anyway, so the Nuremberg Code, that kind of came back to bite them in the butt, because all the things that allegedly happened, and a lot of it was nonsense. Like, the fog of war, it's, everyone has a bias with reading about reports of war. But those Nuremberg Codes came back to bite them, the concept of informed consent. And maybe that even goes back to, not Heraclides. Who's the other guy? Not hippocampus, Hippocrates. No, who's the guy who wrote the medical thing? The barber pole, whatever. It's the concept of informed consent. It's like law has a concept of duty of due care and codes of professional responsibility, and medical has a concept of informed consent. And so now those Nuremberg codes are kind of coming back to bite these people, because all of a sudden they realize, oh, we're in power. We don't have principles. Our principles are us in power. We're the authoritarian dictators that we allegedly warned you about when we were out of power. But now we're in power, and we're going to need to do away with those libertarian protections of the individual, where you get something like this, the rise of a dictator. Now, here's the thing. You think, you kind of strawman the argument and think, oh, well, he's the dictator. He's going to stay in power forever. Is that what you're saying? No, he's going to get out of power when his term is up, of course, and they'll vote somebody else in. But the structure that he's enacted, the familiarity with the need to enact extraordinary powers for a peaceful protest. What do you call it? When you're restructuring the mental expectations of a crowd of people by getting them used to this series of behavior. I cannot think of words when I'm trying to. All right, the closest I can come to is acclimatizing people to future expectations of tyrannical behavior by a dictator. So yeah, he'll step out of power. Someone else will step into power. But you go, oh, so when someone else is voted in, we'll get those liberties back, right? When Bush was out and the Patriot Act and 9/11 happened, oh, well, when he's out and the Democrats get in, we'll get those liberties back, right? No. Because now the deep state has these powers, and the puppet masters have these powers. Like Trudeau and Bush and Trump and Obama and all these, everyone else, Biden. They're all just, they're not the puppet masters. They're powerful, don't get me wrong, for sure. And if they wanted to, they could do a lot. They could do great things, but not Biden, because he's got dementia. He's definitely a puppet. But all these other people are, like they're puppets for these puppet masters on one hand, but like somebody like Trudeau is legitimately a globalist. The Clintons are globalists, and the Bushes and the neocons are also globalists. Even Reagan, though he was more of a puppet than an avowed globalist. These people want this, and they're also being manipulated. So kind of these things are all kind of working together. So anyway, so Canada, eh? First of all, they've been saying this whole time that it's just an extreme fringe alt, tiny group of people. You know, it's a small handful of truckers who are protesting, who are upset at the government's tyranny, and 99% of the country, the adults who could receive the experimental treatment, are on board with receiving it, and there's just a few who are upset about compelled medical procedures without consent. You know, it's just this tiny fringe group. So it's kind of weird that the police didn't just arrest a handful of protesters after, like, give them a week to make their point and then just, you know, give them a warning. And most people are just going to go home. It's like, okay, we've been out here a week. Go home, or we're going to start arresting people and towing trucks. You'd have to arrest a handful that remained. It wouldn't have been a big deal. In case you can't see, if the bouncy castle is probably off camera, they're playing ice hockey or street hockey, whatever. Because look at the logical conclusion with this protest that's going in. Protesters have a demand, and while I totally agree with them, totally support them, they did vote Trudeau into power, though I guess the way their elections work is he got like 30% of the vote, so it's kind of a bit funky when you have a system like that. So I was going to say, they knew, or they voted him into power twice, right? They knew he was a globalist puppet, so they're mad now that a globalist puppet is acting like a globalist puppet. And from the government's perspective, they can't really back down, and more importantly, they don't want to. Yes, they could back down. They could simply, there's a lot of things they could have done to back down. But it all results in a show of no confidence for Trudeau, which is his approval ratings are, I think, less than Biden's. So I don't know if you're not going to see someone in power step down because of lack of confidence. That might happen in the movies and such things, but in the real world, these globalist puppets do not want to upset the puppet masters by no longer being useful puppets. So the government's in a position where they don't want to back down. And the puppet masters, Soros, Rothschilds, and Schwabs, they want this to happen. They're pulling the strings as hard as they can. And to be fair to us and the whole situation is the puppet masters aren't gods. They make mistakes too, and they're not completely invisible, though your average middle of the bell curve person seems terrified to name them. The reason globalists want centralized authority, it might be in banks, government, or institutions, is because they know that they have almost total control behind the scenes. It's why they push for open borders, because they know that people will never be able to unify to resist these reptilian overlords, because they're going to be so busy fighting each other and fighting high crime that, seems to be a result of those policies, instead of teaming up to fight the bankers and take the country back. Justin, I am the Senate. I seem to be confusing the accent from Star Wars and from The King and Lord of the Rings. But you know where I was going with that. Trudeau is channeling his father, Fidel Castro, and seizing power because the peaceful protest is enough for Trudeau to enact his vision of martial law. So, 1918, 1939, 1970, and 2020 bounty castles require his version of martial law, the Emergency Powers Act, the War Powers Act. Because, to be fair, it's associated with World War I and World War II. It's like these truckers, this tiny little fringe group. So I'm not exactly sure why he let it go on for so long. If it's just a tiny little group of people, why didn't you just simply, start towing them, making arrests earlier, and keep on the side of the truckers? But there's a reason he let things go on so long. It could be incompetence, that's true, or it could be this is not negligence, but this is intent. Maybe he's hoping to pull false flags. They were hoping, some Bay of Tonkin type of thing would happen. Something that would happen. Maybe that's what they were hoping for, is to enact a police state, which is what America does. And to be fair, what Western Europe does too, to enact their version of a police state. I don't know if I can say this on YouTube. Probably can't say that on YouTube. I'll leave it at that. Anyway, like, comment, subscribe. Watch out for those bouncy castles and street hockey. and the totalitarian authoritarianism that won't be resolved by voting harder. So, prepare